Yeah, welcome to our video blog, Questions of Doubt in Corporate Valuation. My name is Bernhard Schwetzler, and our question of doubt of today is, does the Gordon-Shapiro model fully capture inflation and growth? And there are two particular reasons for this question. The first one is that sometimes you got the impression that inflation is going to serve as a savior that is used to justify positive growth rates, even in mature businesses with shrinking product markets and the like. Yeah? So sometimes you find even the inflation rate itself serving as a growth rate in the terminal value calculation. And the second reason is a more academic one or a more theoretically based one. That is, this Gordon-Shapiro model recently has come under fire from two American researchers, Bradley and Gerald, that propose a different growth equation. And by doing so, of course, attack the Gordon-Shapiro model. Okay, let's first talk about inflation and corporate valuation in general. Yeah? So practice and theory alike see two ways to take inflation into account in corporate valuation. Either calculate nominally or calculate with inflation adjusted real data. Yeah? And if you properly apply these valuation equations, both should yield the same result. Yeah? So let's first look at the nominal valuation. Here the idea is that your future estimates of the P&L, your future estimates of the free cash flow, everything happens at the then prevailing purchasing power. Yeah, so you try, of course, to incorporate into your projections the impact of inflation on the nominal cash flows of your firm. Yeah, so how does, for instance, an increase in oil prices affect your cash flows and the like? Yeah, note that, of course, this is highly individual and different from firm to firm. Yeah, so if you did this job properly, that is, if you have projected these free cash flows in the then prevailing purchasing power, you then use the nominal rate of return or the nominal cost of capital as a discount rate. And here is the equation. It is the famous Fisher equation that says that investors anticipate inflation and that they do not only want to get compensated for their loss in consumption by the real rate of return, which is denoted here by this small r, but they also wanted to get compensated for the loss in purchasing power caused by inflation. Yeah, and you see that 1 plus r, the nominal rate, is then the combination from 1 plus the real rate times 1 plus inflation. Yeah. So as inflation is anticipated, then our investors use this inflation anticipated discount rate to discount the nominal cash flows. Of course, if you want to, you can use the real valuation as well. That is, you deflate these nominal cash flows by deflating them by the future inflation rate. So you measure these cash flows in the current purchasing power. And then, of course, you also use the real, that is inflation adjusted discount rate as calculating the present value. And as you can see here down on the right hand side, both yield the same result. Yeah, so it doesn't make a difference on whether you first deflate the nominal cash flows and then use the real discount rate, or if you leave the free cash flows at the then prevailing purchasing power and discount with the inflation adjusted discount rate. Yeah. So in most of the cases, researchers and practitioners alike recommend the nominal valuation because you don't have to estimate the inflation adjusted discount rate and then simply take the nominal rates that are available on the market. Yeah? One thing should be stressed again, that the impact of inflation is highly individual from firm to firm different. Yeah? So some firms can pass inflation impact on to their customers where others can't. So the thing is, inflation affects the value of your corporation. Yeah? Okay, so now let's look at our Gordon-Shapiro model. and check on whether our Gordon-Shapiro model reflects and captures all this inflation requirements. And if you look at the equation, then you see it does, because all the figures that are showing up in this equation down here on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side are nominal figures. The future earnings are nominal in the then prevailing purchasing power. The rate of return, ROIC, is a nominal, not inflationary adjusted rate of return. The WACC is a nominal discount rate, and of course our growth rate G is also the growth rate of the nominal earnings, of the nominal free cash flows in the future. So you see that on first glance, our Gordon-Shapiro model is a nominal valuation model. All figures are nominal, and that means there is no need to additionally pack inflation rate or any inflation growth caused by inflation on top of this. So, but now to our theoretical dispute. So you see here on the left-hand side, you see our terminal value model from Gordon-Shapiro. The growth is retention times return. And here you see on the right-hand side, the model proposed by Bradley and Gerald, two American researchers. And you see here that the growth rate here in the nominator, the growth rate, of course, also contains this Q times ROIC term from the retention, but it also contains this term 1 minus the retention rate, so the payout ratio times the inflation, as an additional here growth factor that is, of course, caused by inflation. So, and the two authors are rather harsh in their judgment of the standard valuation literature, because they say that this Gordon-Shapiro model is a misapplication of the constant growth model and the conditions of inflation found throughout the finance and valuation literature. So now, cutting through all the equations, what it boils down to finally is this difference between the two models. You see here on the left-hand side again our Gordon-Shapiro model. We have old assets with a book value of 100 million. They earn a 10% ROIC and create earnings of 10 million, 10% times 100 million. And then the firm retains here 20%, buys 20 million new assets that also earn a rate of return of 10%. And these new assets then create 2 million additional earnings. So we see that any increase in earnings is caused by new assets that are bought and earn a particular rate of return. That's the story behind the Gordon-Shapiro model, that growth in earnings is caused by growth in assets, and growth in assets is caused by buying new assets. So now looking at Bradley and Gerald, you see that these two components here are alike in our Gordon-Shapiro model. Old assets earn earnings, new assets that are bought by retention, financed by retention, produce new assets. But there is a third source of additional earnings. You see here that this is a quote out of the working paper. The value of the initial invested capital will grow with inflation, and with a constant real return on invested capital, the firm's free cash flows will grow with the same rate. So the idea of Bradley and Gerald is that due to inflation, you write up the book value of your assets, and this additional value that is caused by the writing up due to inflation is then multiplied with the rate of return and yields additional earnings. So in that sense, writing up your assets due to inflation is yielding as a result an inflation-based or inflation-caused earnings growth and free cash flow growth as well. So when comparing the two, I am deeply convinced that the Gordon-Shapiro model is superior from the valuation logic, because I do not think that it's appropriate to firmly believe that just writing up your assets and the book value of your assets due to inflation will produce any additional sales or give you any additional customers buying your products. It is you have to buy new assets that produce new products that are sold then to new customers. Yeah? So I do not think that it's a good way to look at growth, inflating your assets, multiplying it with a rate of return, and by doing so, creating additional free cash flows. Yeah? So, and of course, as an add-on, accounting standards usually do not even allow for the appreciations above the historic costs. Yeah? So, our conclusion, and there are some working papers that I've written jointly with my colleague Gunther Friedl from TU Munich, is there is no need for the adjustments in the valuation formula. The Gordon-Shapiro formula is based on nominal future cash flows, nominal cost of capital, and thus fully captures the impact of inflation, as it assumes that here growth in earnings is only caused by newly acquired assets that produce new goods that are sold to new customers, and not by writing up old assets and multiplying it with a rate of return. Yeah. So this distinction is important because, as you may know, recently the Institute of the German CPAs recommends this Bradley-Gerald equation just to capture inflation-based and inflation-caused growth. And as I said, I'm deeply convinced that this is not an appropriate idea. Yeah. So finally, to wrap up, yes, inflation does have an impact on the firm value. This impact is highly firm specific, and it should be reflected in the estimation of the future cash flows in the then prevailing purchasing power. But on the other hand, no, inflation does not require you to come up with a new valuation equation. That's it for today. Thank you.